All right. Thanks so much for that intro, Eliza. I'm just going to share my slides. Is that showing up okay? Perfect. So like Eliza said, I've been serving with the Marin Resource Conservation District for the year, and I'm mainly going to talk about my focal point project of the year, which I'm calling Marin RCD remapping, which was a pretty much transformation of our entire spatial data management system for our carbon farming program. So a brief overview of the Marin RCD. The Marin County is located in the Bay Area, California, directly north of San Francisco. The county it's a mix of larger cities, suburban sprawl from San Francisco and Agland. And the RCD sphere of influence works directly in that unincorporated area of Marin that you can see in pink, which is mainly the Agland in the area. And the RCD works on the unceded territory of the Coast Miwok and the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, which is the federally recognized tribe in the area. And the RCD has its hands in a lot of different programs around the county, but our three main programs that we work on is called one's Conserving Our Watershed, which works with land managers on permitting, planning, designing, and implementation of infrastructure that will help improve water quality, both on their working lands and in the county overall, due to the fact that nature has no borders. Urban Stream Coordination, which works with landowners living on stream banks that are incredibly eroded to support good Lord English, to support that reduction of the erosion rate and salmonid habitat monitoring as well, and our carbon farming program, which works with land managers on the planning, design, and implementation of carbon farming practices to sequester carbon on their working lands. And the RCD, I'm just going to define carbon farming for anyone who isn't familiar with the term. We work off of the Carbon Cycle Institute definition of it, which is a local nonprofit in the area, which defines carbon farming as a whole farm approach to optimizing carbon capture on working lands by implementing practices that are known to improve the rate at which CO2 is removed from the atmosphere and stored in plant material and or soil organic matter. And so this is where my main sphere of focus was in this third program. So we use spatial data or geographic information systems or GIS data in carbon farming in a variety of ways. Internally, we use it for directly planning and designing carbon farm practices on properties. So literally drawing out where certain things will be applied on working lands, tracking project participation of land managers, so on and so forth. Externally, we report to a lot of different organizations. The RCD is a special district that is mainly funded through grants. So we have to report out a lot of our data to our grant funders, other local partners, Project Tracker, Marin Citizens, and the Marin County Climate Action Plan. And these are tied together through monitoring. We have to have a monitoring system to be able to track our data and useful information for both our internal and external purposes. So why this project had to happen goes back to the history of carbon farming in Marin County, which is relatively recent but important. So in 2008, UC Berkeley started a carbon sequestration research program in the county, and around the same time, the Marin Carbon Project was founded in the county as well. And the MCP is a consortium of local orgs in the county, including the RCD, our local land trust, our local NRCS chapter, cooperative extension chapter, et cetera. And the goal was to develop a countywide agricultural carbon sequestration program that could reach different producers and provide different technical and economic support to producers who wanted to be more sustainable and capturing more carbon on their land. And the goal of it is essentially to help Marin County meet or exceed the greenhouse gas reduction goals outlined in the climate action plan in the county, which I will explain a little bit more. In 2013, the Marin Carbon Program started working on 3 demonstration carbon farm plans in Marin County that the RCD was a leader in that creation of those demonstration plans. And then in 2015, we expanded outside of those plans and started writing more carbon farm plans for more landowners in the area. And then in 2020, the Marin Carbon Project worked with the county to develop the newest version of the agricultural chapter of the Marin County Climate Action Plan. And in this plan, the goal is to reduce carbon emissions in the county overall from a 60% reduction from emission rates in 2005 through a combination of mitigation and sequestration efforts. And agriculture specifically is supposed to be 30% of that total possible sequestration of carbon by 2030. This accounts to, if ag is going to do what we've promised to do, this means agricultural lands need to sequester over 55,000 metric tons of carbon within the next over this decade, which is the equivalent of taking 12,000 cars off the road for the year. So this is a hefty project that we're working on. And the only way that we know if we're going to be if we've been successful is if we have successful data tracking and monitoring to report to this plan. So that brings me to why this was necessary. Land manager demand for carbon farm plans in the county is increasing. On that map on the last slide showed the current status of different carbon farm plans in the county. The RCD has written or co-written at least 18 in the county, and that need for carbon farm plans is only increasing, especially because we want to be able to meet that 30% sequestration. Additionally, the RCD needed to transfer softwares from ArcMap to ArcPro. Anybody who works in GIS knows that that's the newest iteration of the Esri software, and it is infinitely better and infinitely easier to use. Part of the problem that the data management system in the RCD currently had was there was just a severe lack of data organization. There's a lot of benefits of being at the beginning of a really exciting project like carbon farming. Not many RCDs were looking at carbon farming all the way back in 2008. So a lot of the data was just kind of created as a reactive step to the entire building of the program. So going back into that data, it's not the most well organized, and at the time no one was thinking of, oh, how do we build this so it makes sense for people who did not originally work in this program. And that means the current system of that data was making that map making process incredibly inefficient, and it made monitoring almost impossible. And visually, the RCD published maps that are created in these carbon farm plans are stylistically disjointed, and I've got a couple examples. So this is a map of one of the first demonstration plans. As you can see, some of the practices are kind of hard to read. This is a map that was created, this is the 4th or 5th carbon farm plan that was created by the RCD. Visually, it's very different, slightly easy to read, but looks like it could have been made by a completely different org. And then finally, this is a map from a plan that the RCD co-wrote with our local land trust, Marin Agricultural Land Trust, or MALT. I apologize if I've been using acronyms. Anybody in GrizzlyCorps knows that environmental conservation is inundated with an infinite amount of acronyms that just kind of fall out of your brain. But again, different text, different layout. Again, looks like it could have come from a completely separate source. So the phase 1 of our GIS overhaul at the RCD, which was my main task, along with our agroecologist, Michelle, and the GIS consultant from Green Info Network that the RCD was able to hire, involved kind of the recreation and rebuilding of our entire database of the current data that we had. So this meant compiling carbon farm spatial data into a new system, building new file structures, remapping lost data from just images and PDFs, creating map templates and consistent map symbology, transitioning the system over to the ArcPro software, building a best practices and protocol document for incoming RCD staff who will need to use this system and weren't here when it was built, and outlining phase 2. So I'm going to show you visually what that looked like. The data I walked into, this is just a small example of the chaos that was the old data. If that looks overwhelming, believe me, it was worse. It's incredibly difficult to know what a lot of this means. Sometimes anybody who works in GIS knows that data sources can get disconnected from maps all the time, which means it's really easy to lose things if they're not stored consistently in the same way. And it was pretty much impossible to dig through this madness to find what you needed. And then over a long period of time, kind of finding where everything was, the carbon farm data was able to be transformed into this. So pretty much what this is 8 geodatabases representing thematic conservation practice buckets. And then within those buckets, which is an example is the top right, show specific conservation practice feature classes that tie directly to their NRCS equivalent program or practice. And then within each of those feature classes is every location this practice has been prescribed by the RCD in Marin County, organized by the RCD, whatever program it was. So on that table, you see programs. So all of these were carbon farming prescribed practices, organized by landowner, organized by ranch, because sometimes the ranches have different names than the landowners, so on and so forth. So eventually, when anyone needs to figure out, okay, where did Hank Corda prescribe or plant however much riparian herbaceous cover, there's only one place that it will be now, which is much more efficient, easier to find, and makes creating maps and new plans and reporting out to external sources a lot easier. And then what that looks like in terms of visual maps. So this is another example of an old map, or a map before our GIS overhaul. Again, looks slightly different from the 3 I showed you before. Some of the text on the map is hard to read. You've got this random photo that doesn't need to be there. There's a table that has no units, so no one would know what it was unless you made the table. There was a lot of things to improve. And then this is an example of our new template. So ideally, this makes it slightly clearer. A lot of these maps look better on paper, so I apologize if it's hard to read some of the text on your screen. But we have a much smaller legend that has pretty much only the essential information. We replaced the hard to read text just with numbers, and then you've got corresponding field names and numbers on the side. The scale bar, north arrow, Marin logo, and date, as well as the INSAT map, will all live in the right-hand corner for all of our templates. There's a land acknowledgement on the map, and then you've got this kind of identifying bar on the top showing what type of map this is, so for your carbon farm plan, as well as the land manager. And so ideally with this template, all you need to do, and all of the symbology is, means like the colors and shapes used on the map are also a saved template. So in this instance, instead of having to, okay, draw your data, decide how exactly you want it to look visually, which can be a process that takes anywhere from days to weeks to months, we already have all of these templates saved and stored, which means there's a lot less decision making to make as you're making an entire carbon farm plan. Additionally, carbon farm plans use more maps than just where those prescribed practices would go. We try to give as much information to land managers as possible within these plans about the makeup of their property. So that includes maps showing threatened and endangered species ranges, soils maps, slopes, et cetera, et cetera. And again, there are some problems with these maps. These maps were on a page directly next to each other on this particular plan, and the titles are in different places. The text is slightly different. It just makes it slightly harder for any land manager to go through if they have to kind of reorient themselves to what each map is trying to tell them over and over and over again. So we tried to make all of these supporting maps as consistent as we could. So I have some examples so on to show. So this is the new version of that endangered and threatened species map. This data is from the California Natural Diversity Database, which is an inventory of status and locations of rare plants and animals in California. Like the carbon farm map, we have all of the inserts, logo, scale bar, north arrow, land acknowledgement, all in the right-hand corner. You've got your legend on the right-hand side, and then your identification bar with what kind of map it is and the landowner, land manager name as well. And then that's consistent through all of our supporting maps. So example, we have our soils, and then we have a couple others that are normally included in that process. We have our fine scale vegetation map, which the data comes from the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, who did a really phenomenal project called the Marin Fine Scale Vegetation Map, where they literally mapped the location of over 82 vegetation classes across the entire county. So you can get really specific information about what kind of plants live on working lands, which is really, really cool, and helps to inform what types of plantings you might want to do in a carbon farm plan, what types of plantings the land manager might want to continue because they've seen success on their property before. And then finally, we have a portrait version of these templates as well. This is an example of wildlife corridors, so showing where riparian zones are in relation to the property boundary. And this data can be important because it informs types of fencings, types of plantings that you'd want to put on properties, depending on how close you are to streams and other potential wildlife corridors as well. And again, because these layouts are already created and connected to specific data pathways in our file structure, maps which used to take anywhere from 1 hour to an entire workday to create for a plan now take a grand total of 15 minutes, which is great. So then in terms of phase 2, so that was a lot of the work of what I did. And then in terms of phase 2, trying to create a path forward for the RCD. Recently, as of July 1, the RCD hired a full-time GIS and monitoring program manager. So if we're talking about capacity building, I built capacity for a full-time job, which is pretty cool. And in that position, they'll hopefully be able to develop a monitoring and tracking system across all programs, not just the carbon farming program. They'll be able to ground truth some lost carbon farming data, which unfortunately happened as we transitioned from ArcMap to ArcPro. They'll be able to work with partner organizations to create public facing maps and visuals representing conservation work on working lands in the county. And they'll be able to successfully report to external organizations, including the Marin County Climate Action Plan. So then just to look at a couple other of the things I worked on, though GIS was my main focus, I also got to help out on a couple other things. One of them is this hedgerow booklet, which our agroecologist, Michelle, was in charge of researching, authoring, editing, technical reviewing, and so on. And actually the visuals were designed by the GrizzlyCorps member who was here before me. So this was a 2-year project completed by 2 different GrizzlyCorps members. And my main tasks in this project were Spanish translation, final design coordination, printing, and distribution. And speaking of distribution, everything was mailed out to our partner organizations this morning. So check for project completion. And this is a really cool booklet, because not only does it encourage local land managers to consider hedgerow and windbreak plantings on their land, encourage the public to look at benefits of increasing plant diversity on working lands, but it's one of the first Marin specific publications on best practices regarding these hedgerows on working lands. And as far as we can tell, it's one of the first resources available in Spanish for Marin specific projects. So we're hopefully going to be able to reach a much bigger audience through the publication of the booklet in both languages. And then another thing that I worked on pretty consistently was outreach and education through our website. The RCD website has 2 goals: providing resources for land managers within the district, which means a lot of really technical pages, and then recently informing public audience about the RCD work in conservation through transparent explanations of RCD programs and operations. Over the past 6 months, the RCD has been trying to become more transparent towards the public and make it very obvious about how we decide which projects we fund, how we decide which projects we do, why programs have been built the way they've been created. which is an important outreach because I personally had no idea what an RCD was before I worked here. And so it's important to try and reach the public to help them understand the work that we do, because the RCD is really doing phenomenal work that's affecting everybody, even though our main audience is land managers and working on ag land. But the work that the RCD does has consequences across the county. So it's been a really interesting project to try and communicate some more technical projects to a layman's audience. So that's pretty much an overview of my main focus for the year. I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of the RCD staff that I got to work with this year. I got to work with a really amazing group of women who were phenomenal mentors, coworkers, just people to talk to. I truly could not be more fortunate to have been placed where I was. Also, Megan Torres at Green Info Network. I know a lot of GrizzlyCorps members were taking GIS classes. I was incredibly lucky to, whenever I was confused, just be able to shoot her an email. She was a really invaluable resource. Obviously, Michelle, Eliza, and Stephanie at GrizzlyCorps, and the entire GrizzlyCorps cohort. And then these are just some pictures to prove that even though the majority of the work I did for the RCD was on the computer, I did in fact get outside this year. And that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Tara. That was an awesome presentation, and I love getting to see all the visuals that you created. They're pretty incredible. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat or message Tara, or feel free to unmute yourself as well, or just give some celebration reactions.